Hello, everyone. This week we are going to be looking at some different properties of goods: rival, non rival, excludable, non excludable, and then we're going to focus in on two types: public goods and common pool resources, as these are both non excludable types. And so we're going to sort of delve into how this is a little bit different from other markets we've already went into where you have excludable goods. This is going to be a continuation of chapter 18 from the Pearson textbook. So it's like the second half of chapter 18. You may have already read this section, but if not, I will put a note on the start page on where to go for that. So, properties of goods and services, we are specifically looking at whether it's rival or non rival, excludable or non excludable, and then the different combinations of both of those. So, rival goods are things that are used up once they are consumed. For example, if I take a bite of an apple, you cannot take that same bite. It's just gone. I ate the apple, no more apple. A non rival good is different. It's not used up once it's consumed. So I can use it and then it's still available for somebody else's use. So if I go outside and look at the mountains by PCC, you can also go outside and look at the same mountains. Me looking at them does not make them no longer exist. Excludable goods are things that can be limited to people who are willing to pay. And this is sort of what we focused on in our earlier chapters when we were looking at cost curves and companies making a profit or loss. Excludable goods means you can get people to pay for them. It's not just open to anyone. So whoever buys the apple gets to have the apple. Non-excludable goods, which is going to be the focus of this lecture, is looking at goods that can't be limited to people who pay for their use. So, example is you still benefit from national defense even if you have never paid any taxes. So, if there's a submarine patrolling the coast of California, it doesn't just protect the people who pay taxes, it has to protect the whole state. Non-excludable goods, these get a little bit trickier because we can have a free rider problem where people can use these things without potentially having to pay for them. We're going to look at basically 4 different types and then focus on these non-excludable types more. So I have a box here. If you are a box person, if you really loved game theory, you can see that in the excludable and rival section is private goods such as shoes, and in the non-rival excludable section, these are called club goods, so things like a gym or a dining hall. In our non-excludable section, we have non-excludable and rival. These are common property resources, or sometimes called common pool resources. And in the bottom corner here, we've got non-rival and non-excludable, which are considered public goods, so things like parks, fireworks, and public events. If you're not a table person, I got you covered. We've got this next slide here. So if it's a private good, it is rival and excludable. It will be produced if the market price is high enough. So this is where we get shoes and clothes and hats and houses and all the things that typically we think of in product markets. Club goods are non-rival but still excludable. They will also be produced if the market is high enough. So club goods, this would be like if you go to the gym, you use the treadmill still exists for the next person who wants to use it. Common property resources are rival and non-excludable, and we get issues where unpriced resources get used up too quickly. We'll look at some more examples of this. The private and marginal cost benefit is going to be different from the social optimum. So what we're going to see is, let's say, I don't know, you go to the ocean and you want to catch a fish, and let's say the total fish we could take out at any one time is 10 out of a total of 20. And if we take out more than 10 fish, there won't be any fish next year. So we have to leave at least half of them in. Well, the problem is if you are there and you're like, well, 10 fish are already gone, do I take out fish number 11? And if there's no restrictions, you might say, yes, I'm going to take it out, because if I leave it in there, someone else is just going to take it out tomorrow. And all of our fish are going to get used up anyway, and I'm just not going to benefit from it. So when we have these non-excludable resources, it gets tricky because people are going to take stuff out. They're going to use too much of it because there's no benefit for saving for the future. And then a public good is something that is non-rival and non-excludable. So it's not used up when somebody uses it, and you can't prevent people who haven't paid for them using it. The individual cost to participate does not noticeably increase the individual marginal benefit, and we definitely have a free rider problem here. So if you think about taxes, let's say we have 100 people in our society, and we need $1,000 to build a park. And if we have taxes, everybody is going to pay $10 in taxes. We're going to collect all the money and get the park. Now, what happens if you don't pay? So whatever benefit you get from the park, that happens whether you paid for the park or not. So your marginal benefit from the park is, let's say, $12. And if you pay the tax, your marginal cost is $10. So we would say it's worth it. You might want to pay. But what if it's volunteer? You just have to volunteer to pay taxes. Well, I'm not going to volunteer anyway, because then I'm going to have a marginal benefit of 12 and a marginal cost of 0, which is better. So for things that are non-rival and non-excludable, if we do not have compulsory taxes, we don't have a way of the government making it happen, we're going to have underproduction. We're not going to get some of these things. We may end up with worse outcomes for society. Okay, so we're going to focus on these two mainly in this lecture. Okay, so tragedy of the commons. This is dealing with common pool resources or common property resources. And there's an example in your book if you'd like to read a longer version of this about crawfish and basically catching the crawfish, using them for various purposes. But we're going to look at this private cost versus the marginal social cost. And this kind of is looking at, it's similar to what we looked at with externalities, in that we have a different marginal social cost than what we do with that private cost. But the thing is, it's an unpriced resource, meaning it's free. You don't have to pay anyone for the crawfish. Or if there's a fruit tree in a public park, I don't know, there's apples. Pretend this is a beautiful drawing of apples here, an apple tree. People are just going to go pick all the apples, even before they're ripe. Okay, so here's an example. Let's say we have a blackberry bush in a public park, and the berries are almost fully ripe. So if you wait until tomorrow, they're going to be perfect. They're going to taste amazing. If you eat them today, they're still pretty good. They're not as ripe, but they're definitely still edible. So will people wait and come back tomorrow to eat the berries, or are they going to pick them early? Typically, they're going to pick them early, because if I wait and I leave the park, what's going to happen when I come back tomorrow? All the berries are going to be gone, right? Maybe a squirrel ate them. Maybe someone else came and picked them and said, I don't care if they're all the way ripe. But the fact is, they're going to get eaten, right, before they're prime. And so the problem is whoever picks them first gets to eat them. So whenever we have something that's out in the open, we have land for grazing animals, we have fish in the ocean, we have fruit in public places, whoever takes it, whoever uses it gets to have it. But if it was a blackberry bush in a private yard, let's say it's in my backyard instead, and the berries are almost fully ripe, well, now I'm definitely going to wait till tomorrow, right? I want to leave them on the bush as long as possible because I want to get the absolute best berries. And if I leave them until tomorrow, they're still going to be there waiting for me. Someone else isn't typically going to come into my backyard and pick all the berries. So the homeowner is not going to eat them early. They're going to wait, and they're going to get that optimal level of berries. And so Eleanor Ostrom is an economist. She actually won the Nobel Prize. She did some work on this issue of tragedy of the commons. And she said we can actually solve some of these problems when we manage resources locally with small groups. So the problem is if you're looking at fish, they don't really care about boundaries, right? They don't care about borders. So, I don't know, a California fish decides to go swim down to Mexico. It doesn't get to the border in the water and be like, oh, well, I shouldn't go into Mexico. I need to make sure the Californians get to catch me and not the Mexicans. So they just don't care. They don't know what's happening. And so the problem is if you live near a border, if you don't take that fish out of the ocean, some other community is now going to get that. But if we have ways where we can manage resources, water or fruit or other things in much smaller groups so that we care about the other people who we're dealing with this with, we can actually sort of solve some of these problems that don't get solved naturally with large groups. What we have to do in large groups is we have to make laws and regulations and treaties and other things, licenses for fishing. We have to try to do things to restrict people from taking fish out of the ocean, but the fish can go swim to areas where it can't be monitored. Okay, so let's look at an example. We're going to look at a socially optimal herd size. And we're going to assume that the villagers each have $100 that they can invest in government bond, or they can buy a steer, which is like a cattle or a cow, some kind of animal. And at the end of the year, they're going to sell them. So they're going to sell their bond, they're going to sell the animal at the end of the year, and they're going to get 13% on their bond. So at the end of the year, the bond is going to be worth $113. So basically, they earned an income of $13 off of the bond at the end of the year. Or they can buy a steer, and the value at the end of the year depends on how many there are. So if we only have 2 animals out on the field, they will each sell for $119. If we have 5 animals on the field, they're each going to sell for $111. So more animals is going to mean a lower value. And I don't really know a lot about raising animals, so bear with me here. But just imagine we've got this grass field, and I don't know, let's pretend this is a steer. Looks more like a caterpillar. Okay, I need to go take an art class. Okay, so pretend there's like one animal here. He can walk around and eat all the grass. He's going to be healthy and fat, and he's going to be worth a lot. But we start putting more animals out. That one has spots. Okay. More animals out. I know you did. You took this class because you wanted to see me try to draw a steer. This is like the highlight of your semester. I get it. Don't worry, I won't deprive you of this. Okay. So now there's like 5. So they're still going to be able to eat stuff, but there's more crowded. There's just not a lot of grass there. They're not able to gain as much weight, be as fat, and so they're not going to be as worth as much at the end of the year. And so villagers have to decide. Sorry. All right, let's try that again. So the villagers have to decide, do they want to purchase a steer, or do they want to purchase a government bond? Because they do want to earn income at the end of the year. And so this middle column tells you the income per steer depending on how many there are. So it's between $11 and $26. And this is a common property resource problem because the grass or the field is that common pool resource. And there's no fence around it, so whoever wants to put their animal there can put their animal there. Whoever eats the grass gets the grass, and it's not available for someone else. And so it's a problem because if too many people are grazing or too many animals are grazing on that field, it means it's less valuable for other people who want to use it. Okay, so first, individual optimum. We are just looking at these first 3 columns here. The individual just cares, how much can I earn from both of my options? And if we look at the income from the bond, I'm going to add another column here. It's 13 each, right? Okay. And the income from the steer is going to go down as we add more. Okay. So will the first person, there's no animals yet, okay? Will the first person put their cow on the field? Yes, because 26 is more than 13. What about the second guy? Will the second guy put his cow on the field? Yes, because 19 is more than 13. So yes. What about the third one? 16 is still more than 13, so the third one will. And then what about the fourth one? He's indifferent, but we'll just say yes too. Okay, so third and fourth. Fifth guy, 13 is greater than 11, so he's going to say no to the steer, and he's going to buy a bond instead. So we're going to get 4 steer, and we're going to get 1 bond. The problem is this individual optimum is not our social optimum. This is not what's best for the group. We are maximizing our individual income and not maximizing our group income. If we want to maximize our group income, we need to act like a monopolist and pretend like one person can buy all 5, right? 5 steer or 5 bonds. In that case, we want to look at the marginal income and the total income for the whole village. So now instead of just looking at the income based on the price, we actually want to look at the total, which is going to be that price times the quantity, or in this case, income times quantity. And then the marginal income, which is the difference between the totals. Okay. So when we have 1 on the field, it's 26 and 26. When we have 2 times 19, we get a total income of 38. For 3, we get 3 times 16, which gives us 48. 4 times 13, 52, and 5 times 11, which is 55. Then we want to find our marginal income. So this is what we did with all of the other things where we did marginal. You take the total of year 2, or total of quantity 2, and minus the total of quantity 1. So when we go from 1 to 2, erase some of this, 1 to 2, we go from 26 to 38. That's only $12 extra. Okay, so why? So why is marginal income 12 when each villager will earn 19? Well, okay, so yes, each villager will still earn 19. However, we're comparing it to the 26 that the original villager would have earned. So let's see, person 1, they started out at 26. But now when person 2 joins, they're going to add 19, but it's going to drop person 1 also down to 19. So we didn't get 19 extra dollars. We got 19 extra minus the 7 that first one decreased in value. And then we do the same thing for the third one. We only get 10 extra dollars from the third one, 4 extra dollars, and 3 extra dollars. So if we were looking at this as a monopolist, if one villager could buy all the sheep, or steer, they would stop after 1 in this case. Because in that second one, instead of buying the second one, they should buy the government bonds. They'll make more money. So our social optimum is going to be at 1 steer, and our individual optimum is going to be at 4. So this means that we have overgrazing. Our villagers are not taking into account the group, which I think makes sense. So let's say you are the second guy to get in line to buy a steer. Are you going to be like, oh, I will take 13 instead of 19? Because I care that I'm hurting the quality for the first cow. No way. You're going to be like, I'm going to get the cow because I'm not going to miss out on this income just because someone else got here first. I'm not going to sacrifice my own income just so someone else can have more. So each villager is not thinking about the people around them. Okay, so what do we do for the government? And we're like, well, we want to limit it to 1 steer. Well, we can say we're going to have an auction. So we're going to give 1 license for a steer. Okay, so we're going to say 1 steer, and then people can come and bid. How much are you going to bid for the license? So one person's like, I'll pay $1, I'll pay $2, I'll pay $5. And they bid it all the way up until, in this case, they're going to be able to sell it for 26 at the end of the year, and then subtract the 13 that they would earn for the bond. And in this case, that means there's $13 left over to be able to pay for that license. And they're not going to pay more than 13 because then they would just make more money from the bond. So maybe it'll be $12.99. So you want to remember from this, the individual optimum is always going to be a higher number than the social. It doesn't always have to be 4 and 1. It could be 4 and 3, or 3 and 2, or 7 and 2. But the social optimum is always going to be at a lower number than that individual optimum. And then this brings us to public goods. So these are non-rival and non-excludable. Our last example was rival and non-excludable. Pure public goods, so it's purely non-rival and purely non-excludable, are almost always going to be provided by the government. They suffer from the free rider problem, and we're going to end up with underproduction. So if we had to voluntarily pay taxes, maybe we wouldn't pay zero. Maybe be like, well, I should pay some taxes, but most people would pay less than they're currently paying. I personally don't love all the taxes I pay, but that doesn't mean I don't like all the stuff that is provided by taxes. Taxes are the main source of funding for public goods. We can have different types of taxes. So there's a head tax where everybody pays the same dollar amount. So we're going to build a public park and everyone's going to pay $10. Regressive tax, this is where a proportion of income paid in taxes declines as income rises. One example of this would be sales taxes. So even though it's a flat percentage, say everyone's paying 10.5% in sales tax, when you look at lower income people versus higher income, lower income people maybe spend most of their money on taxable, we'll just say half of their income on taxable stuff. And higher income people maybe are spending a quarter of their income on taxable stuff. So when you look at the percentage to their income, the amount of their income they're paying as sales tax is going to be less when they're a higher income group versus a lower income group. Proportional tax, everyone pays the same proportion of their income. So if everyone paid 10% of income, this could be a proportional tax. Sales tax is based on the purchase price of the item. And then a progressive tax, this is where the proportion of income paid in taxes rises as income rises. So in the US, our federal income tax system is progressive. So if you are low income, you may only pay 10%. If you're higher income, you may pay 25% income tax. And I'll show you a chart in a little bit too about this. And a lot of times for public goods, we're going to have voting. People are going to vote yes or no. Do we provide this thing? Do we not? And in a democracy, we're just saying that all citizens are going to vote for their representatives. Sometimes they vote directly for certain policies and taxes. If we have a simple majority, it just means you have to earn more votes than the other alternatives to win. Supermajority is earning more than half of the votes. It also depends on the context. If you're talking about certain things, sometimes they may say supermajority, and it might mean 67% or 75%, just depending on which government body you're talking about. But the way that certain elections work is with like districts or groups, or US, we have electoral college for the president. And what this means is that each chunk of people maybe counts as one vote. And rather than having individual votes added up, we're looking at the voting of the groups. So in this example, we have 9 districts that each have 100 people each. And you need 5 districts to win the election. And you need at least 51 votes to win a district. So I'm trying to win 5 of these 9 groups of people, and then I will win. Now, depending on how the people are separated, it could be that you have 51 people who vote for you in 5 districts, and the other side gets 49 votes in each of these. Very close race. And the other 4 districts, you have all 100 people voting for the other side. But the way this works out is that this person gets 5 votes. And the other guy, even though he has way more individual votes, gets 4 total of the votes. Okay, so in this case, you can win the election with 255 out of 900 of the people voting for you. This is about 28.3%. In the US, because of the Electoral College, it is actually possible for a president to be elected with as little of 24% of the popular vote. So all of the individual people voting, you can have 24% of them vote for you, and you could still technically become president. Now, has this happened? No. We've had a couple of cases where we had someone who lost the election, even though they won the popular vote. And that is because of how districting works. Typically, this in the U.S., this only happens when we have a very close election where it's really like neck and neck, 50-50. It's not going to be typically as extreme as this. But that's why you always want to pay attention when they say, hey, we're redistricting. We're changing the boundaries for where the votes count and how we decide who gets to be our Senate or our Congress representatives. California and Texas both did this around 2025. They changed some laws saying, hey, we can draw new boundaries to try to get more people in a certain party as our representatives in Congress. When a public good is non-rival, the social marginal benefit is determined by all of the different people participating in the market. So we actually get to add these demand curves vertically, which is the opposite of what we did in the product market. Let's say this is like a public park. So if there's a public park, every single person who uses that park now is an extra demand that's going to shift this upward. And because it's non-rival, that means every extra person using it just adds more benefit to that thing. So if 10 people use the park, there's a higher benefit than if 5 people use the park. So this is different than private goods because it is non-rival. If I used the park and then the park disintegrated and we had to build a new park, then it wouldn't happen this way. We'd have to add them horizontally the same way. So for non-rival goods, we add the prices together since the quantity is fixed, no matter how many people use it, but that value keeps increasing the more people use it. So demand for community park is determined by the value each community member benefits from the park. So if you have more community members, more people using the park, that benefit goes up. The thing with public goods, though, is everybody pays for them even if they don't use it. So all of our community members are going to be paying for this public park even if they don't all use it. So public schools, public resources. If you live in a city with like a really good school district, you're going to be paying higher taxes to cover those good schools than in a school district with like worse schools. So sometimes people will, I don't know. Arcadia, Temple City both have really good schools. Let's say you do not have any kids, you are 60, you're not planning on having any kids, and you want to move into Arcadia. You are going to be paying more money to live there because they have a good school district, even though you may not directly benefit from that because you don't have kids going to that school. So we're going to get some market failures with public goods, meaning we need government intervention because the market is not going to naturally provide the right amount. This example is from your book looking at the demand for clean air and how much people are willing to pay. So when we look at like high income households versus middle versus low, the high income households are willing to pay more for clean air than the low income households. The curves show how much each would pay at different levels of air pollution. So down here is the amount of pollution. So we would say low pollution all the way up to high pollution. And each household is actually willing to pay more when air quality is bad. So over here, we have bad air quality. Our low income households willing to pay $1,500. And when it's not that bad, but it's still pollution, they're only willing to pay $500. Our high income household goes from about $800 all the way up to bad air quality. Now they're willing to pay $3,000. And so you can see we have that increase, maybe because we notice it more, we realize it's a bigger problem, we're willing to pay more to fix the problem. And so in general, higher income households are going to have higher demands for clean air than lower income households. When we have certain policies, who's willing to pay, if it's voluntary, the low income households aren't going to necessarily want to volunteer to pay because it's going to benefit everyone. High income households, maybe they volunteer to pay some, but they know that every bit of air they clean is going to benefit everyone. So let's say here, this is all of the air, and you have all of the different people everywhere. So let's say this guy right here is like, I'm going to pay $3,000 to clean the air. Well, it cleans a little bit of the air near him, but it cleans some of the air over here and some of the air over here and some of the air over here. So it doesn't just only clean the air near him. And so while he would get maybe $3,000 benefit from having clean air, because if he's the only person paying, it's not going to clean the air $3,000. He's not going to voluntarily contribute. And same thing with low income, right? So maybe this guy over here is like, I would like clean air. I'm going to volunteer $500. But the problem is it cleans some of the air way over here and some of the air way over here, and the clean air gets distributed everywhere regardless of who's paying. So what's going to happen in these markets if we don't have some kind of rules or regulations or ways of making everybody pay, nobody's going to voluntarily pay to do this. Okay, so let's look at an example where we get to apply voting and figuring out if we're going to provide a public good or not. Okay, so we have 3 people, Wilson, Prentice, and Beth. They would all benefit from having a water filter in the lake near their homes. The filter costs $1,500, and one filter is enough for all 3 houses. And they have different reservation prices based on their incomes, and nobody is willing to purchase the filter on their own. So Wilson would be willing to pay up to $600. Prentice is willing to pay up to $500, and Beth is willing to pay up to $300. So is it possible to negotiate a way to split the cost so everybody ends up happy? Well, what we want to look here is the total benefit versus the total cost. So total benefit is going to be 600 plus 500 plus 300. So our total benefit from this water filter is $1,400. So they do want to have a water filter. It will make them $1,400 worth of happy to get this water filter. The problem is, though, when we look at the total cost, it's going to be $1,500. So there's no way to split this up so everyone's going to be happy. Either everybody is paying more than their own reservation price, or 1 or 2 or 3 of them are going to be paying more than their reservation price. So if we provide this water filter, if it gets voted in, somebody is going to be unhappy, possibly all of them, because they're going to be paying more than what they value it. Okay, so their total surplus, their total benefit's only $1,400. What's going to happen if the government says, we want to have a water filter and we're going to have a vote to see if we should put this in? Well, it's going to depend on the type of tax used to fund the project. So let's say we have a head count tax where everybody has to pay $500 to put in this filter. And as long as 2 people vote yes, it's going to happen. Well, Wilson will vote yes, and Prentice will vote yes, because they both have a value of $500 or more. Beth will vote no, but she's going to lose. Okay, so Wilson and Prentice are happy. They're each paying $500. Beth is very unhappy because she's also paying $500, and she only values it at $300. If it's a proportional income tax, so it's related to their income, it's not going to pass. Oops. Because in this case, everyone would have to pay a little bit more. I don't know exactly the amounts, but Beth is going to pay, Wilson would pay $650, Prentice will pay $535, and Beth would pay $315. So proportional to their income, they're all going to be overpaying because there's a total cost that's greater than that total benefit. So if the government provides the filter or forces them to put it in, we would say this is not an efficient outcome. So voting is helpful. It can get us to good outcomes, but sometimes it can also get us to inefficient outcomes. And then here is the U.S. tax system. This is showing the 2026 tax brackets. In the U.S., we have sales tax, which is regressive. Income tax is considered progressive. Social Security and Medicare taxes are considered proportional up to a certain point because you pay a percentage of your income, and then it's regressive. How do tax changes affect total tax revenue? It really just depends. Sometimes increasing tax rates reduces the amount of taxes the government collects. Sometimes lowering tax rates increases the amount of taxes people collect. It depends on elasticity, so how sensitive people are to tax rates, expectations about the future, expectations about the government budget deficit and debt and spending. And so we unfortunately don't have a lot of time to get into this right now, But there's a lot of strategy and theory about that optimal tax rate. If you remember, I think it was our elasticity chapter where we were looking at like total revenue. See total revenue here and then price down here. There was like some optimal point where if you like raise prices higher, you would get less total revenue. The same idea possibly applies to taxes. And so we'll just look like at a tax rate. There's some like optimal level. And if you can find that, that's going to be the maximum the government can collect. And so you'll see people on both sides arguing, we need higher taxes, we need lower taxes. And they're really just arguing like, I think we're on this side of the graph. I think we're on this side of the graph. Because it's not always obvious. Even though our graphs and economics are great, sometimes actually getting the real life data to show where we are is really tricky. So US has a progressive tax system. And so standard deduction down here, this is basically the amount you can take off your taxes that you don't have to pay. So for 2026, the first $16,100 that an individual person earns, they will pay no federal taxes on. Okay, you still might have state taxes. You're definitely still going to have Social Security and Medicare, but the income taxes you're going to pay 0%. Then, okay, they say the next $12,400, everybody pays 10%. And then 12,401 to 50,400, we pay 12%. So let's say you get a raise at work. You were making $12,000. Well, plus 16. So you were making $28,000 a year. And you get a raise to $35,000. And you're like, oh no, that bumps me into a higher tax bracket. I'm going to be paying more. I'm going to earn less money than I did before. You actually aren't, okay? It's only on $401 to 50,400 that you'll be paying the 12% on. You'll still be paying 10% on this 12,400, and you'll still be paying You'll still be paying 0% on this first 16,000. So getting a raise will never lead to less money. You're just paying a higher amount of taxes on those higher dollars that you earned. So the first dollars that you earn, you pay nothing. The next chunk of dollars, you pay 10%. If you earn enough, you might end up paying 37%, but only on those higher tax rates. So that's how tax brackets work. And I don't know. There's a lot of debates. There's a lot of issues with are there work disincentives for taxes? If we charge people higher taxes, are they going to want to quit working? And then we're going to lose government revenue? Or will people in higher incomes always keep working so we can tax them as much as we want? Or maybe they have a lot of money, so if we tax people in the higher brackets too much, then they have an incentive to stop producing things. So there's really a lot of interesting debates about how to deal with this. But the idea is that if we do want to have any provision of public goods, we do have to have some kind of compulsory taxes. It can't just be voluntary. And public goods do have a marginal benefit. And if we don't force people to provide them through taxes, we will just not have them at all. And we would consider that a loss to society. So public goods are going to cause a market failure because we're not going to produce the optimal amount for our group if we're not somehow forced to do so. Okay, so we're going to end that here. So if you haven't read this chunk of the chapter, definitely go back. Let me know if you have any questions about anything, and do the rest of the stuff in the module.